Welcome to the NFL Saturday Podcast. This is Amp, and I'm here to catch you up on fantasy football for the week, and we'll have some fun along the way. Today, let's talk about Week 4 and review the top fantasy players to date. But first, here are your fun facts of the day. Here are some crazy stats so far this season. The Lions are first in offense and last in defense. They've given up the most points and had the most points scored against. Cooper Kupp has more receptions than Justin Fields has completions. Yes, Cooper Kupp has 42 receptions on 54 targets, while Justin Fields has 34 completions on 67 attempts. Not great numbers for Justin Fields. And the last is Kenny Pickett has more interceptions in Mitch Trubisky. Kenny Pickett obviously came in midway through the game last week, so he's only played less than a game, while Mitch Trubisky has played over 3 games, and Kenny Pickett threw 3 interceptions, while Mitch Trubisky's only thrown 2 all season. Now let's talk about Week 4 and the top fantasy players to this point in the season. Let's first start off with the QBs, and I'm just going to go through the top 5 fantasy scoring options in my PPR league. There's obviously going to be different scoring formats, so your rankings might be slightly different, but in general, they should be pretty close if you do have some type of points per reception, whether it's half point or something like that. So first in QBs is Lamar Jackson, who has 119 points on the year. He has 893 passing yards, which is pretty good, but he also has 316 rushing yards. That's insane numbers so far. And a total of 13 touchdowns, which is just insane. He's having a crazy year, and I think if they do start winning some more games, could be the MVP choice. In second is Josh Allen with 114 points. So far, he has 1,227 passing yards. Even more insane numbers for the passing side of things. He also, though, has 183 rushing yards, and on top of that, 12 total TDs. So I personally think he is probably the front runner for MVP right now, especially if the Bills keep looking as good as they do. Then in third place, Jalen Hurts with 103 points. He has 1,120 passing yards with a total of only 8 touchdowns. A lot of them have been taken up by the running backs, but he still does have 205 rushing yards to almost keep up with the other quarterbacks. In fourth place is Patrick Mahomes with 95 points, who has been a lot more sporadic. He has 1,106 passing yards still, though, and 11 total touchdowns with 64 rushing yards. So still pretty good numbers, just could be even better if he was being very consistent, and also if they weren't going up by so much and then not having to throw. The last and fifth option is Jared Goff, which is a big surprise. He's had a great year so far. I mentioned that Detroit has scored the most points, and it's because their defense is giving up the most points. So Jared Goff has 92 points. He has 1,126 passing yards with 11 total touchdowns and only 16 rushing yards, though. So that's really the big difference between him and Patrick Mahomes. Since Jared Goff's defense is so bad, it looks like he probably will be able to keep this up. That's one thing to keep in mind. A lot of the bad defenses, their quarterbacks have to keep up. That's kind of why Lamar Jackson has the crazy stats he does, is because he's having to keep up in these crazy games where his defense is giving up a lot of points, and same with Jared Goff. So that's something to keep in mind. If you are looking for a quarterback, look for those bad matchups for their defense possibly. And who knows, maybe they'll have a game like Jared Goff did last week where he got insane amount of points and was the QB1 on the week. Now let's talk about running backs. The top 5 running backs, of course. First overall is Saquon Barkley, and he has 86 fantasy points, which is actually the lowest fantasy points for an RB1 at this point in the season since 1997. If that is unclear, that just means that overall the RBs are not scoring as much as they usually do. So he has 86 points on 570 rushing yards with only 2 touchdowns. However, he does have 15 receptions, so kind of makes up for that. And those rushing yards are just insane. If he does start scoring more, he's going to really just have an insane season. And yeah, we'll see if that happens. I think he does have that high upside, and it looks like he is back in form. So I think he really could end up being the RB1 this year if he continues rushing as well as he is. The next player is Nick Chubb, who has 85 points, right next to Saquon Barkley. He has 496 yards, but he has 5 touchdowns, and that's really where he makes up those points. And unfortunately, only has 6 receptions, but that's kind of expected with Nick Chubb. You don't really expect him to get a lot of catches, so it's really based on those touchdowns. And if he continues to get those touchdowns, he'll do well, but if he doesn't, then I would be a little worried. I would possibly try to trade him high if you do have that option, but again, he's going to be solid no matter what, so it's totally up to you. In third place, surprisingly, is Austin Ekeler with 78 points. Again, this is a PPR scoring, so he is going to be higher in my league than possibly in some of yours, but if you are an Austin Ekeler owner, you've probably been a little disappointed because he hasn't done well until last week. He has 328 yards total, 3 touchdowns, but 27 receptions. If you are in PPR, that's a solid floor and just really pretty solid numbers. I mean, you drafted him as the RB3 likely, and that's where he is, RB3. So I think he does have that high upside still too. If he does start performing on all the touches he's getting, he really could just go absolute berserk, especially in PPR leagues. So definitely someone I'm trying to trade for if you can. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is in 4th. He has 76 points, 325 total yards with 5 TDs and 13 receptions. So far, he's been very solid, especially with the value and where you drafted him. He is the biggest value, I'd say, on the RBs at least, besides possibly Saquon, but Clyde Edwards-Helaire, you could possibly even get him in like the 7th round. So this is just insane value, especially with the touchdowns. If he does keep getting those touchdowns, he will continue, but I do think it's more likely that he goes back to kind of the normal touchdown range he's had in his career, and I'm a little worried about him going forward. That said, I still think he does have some upside, and I don't think he has top 5 upside, so I think he is a good trade-away candidate. In 5th place is Christian McCaffrey with 72 fantasy points. He has felt like a complete bust and wasted pick as the number 1 overall pick. However, he's not that bad because all the RBs have been bad. He has had a solid floor because he has 19 receptions. He also has 408 yards with 2 TDs. So if he does start getting more touchdowns, he'll obviously do great. And he should probably be more likely in that Austin Ekeler reception range. 19 receptions is great, but I honestly wouldn't be surprised if he can get more receptions because they are not a good team. The Panthers do not look good, and McCaffrey is going to be needed catching up and still needed catching balls. So I really think he does have that high RB1 upside still. I really do think he could be the top RB by the end of the year. So if I were you, I'd try to trade for him. Probably not likely because a lot of Christian McCaffrey owners are already huge fans, so they're probably going to stick it out, but if you can try to trade for McCaffrey, I definitely would. Now, let's talk about wide receivers, and I'm going to start with, of course, I think everyone expected him to be here, Cooper Kupp, with 106 fantasy points. I talked about him earlier. He has 42 receptions. That is insane. He is just getting targeted by Matthew Stafford like no one else. Just literally his one and only read. And Cooper Kupp is just someone that if you have drafted him, you're just so ecstatic about having him on your team. He has 422 yards so far. He has 4 TDs. as well. So he's just really killing it all around. I mean, it's kind of expected, just picking up right where he was last year. Now in second place is Stefon Diggs with 96 points. All over, just a good year for wide receivers so far. I don't know if they're going to keep this up, but so far a great year for wide receivers. You may want to trade some of these guys now if you can, especially some of the other wide receivers on this list. I'll mention them in a second, but Stefon Diggs, 96 points, 406 yards with 4 TDs. So pretty similar numbers to Cooper Kupp, actually. The main difference, though, 31 receptions. So 11 less receptions if you are in PPR formats like me. That is the main difference. Next is Tyreek Hill, who has 91 points. He has 482 yards on 2 TDs and 31 receptions. It's really those touchdowns that make a huge difference. But overall, Tyreek Hill has been killing it this year. That said, with Tua going down, this is a possible trade away target. I know it pains all the Tyreek Hill owners who love that upside and game-winning ability, but I might trade him away because he is still the wide receiver 3. And he might fall maybe to wide receiver 5, 6. That said, you could probably get a huge offer for him. Up to you though. I wouldn't necessarily push a trade, only if you get good value. Next is Justin Jefferson in fourth with 86 points. He has 396 yards on 2 TDs and 28 receptions. So essentially, pretty similar thing with Tyreek Hill. He doesn't have the 4 touchdowns like Stefon Diggs and Cooper Kupp. So he's just not getting as many points as you kind of expected. We were drafting him as the wide receiver 1. He's still the wide receiver 4, but a lot of people are a little disappointed because he's had a couple bad weeks and he's had some really huge weeks. But a lot of people remember those bust weeks more than the other weeks. So he is a possible trade for candidate. That said, I think you're going to have to give way too much for him, so probably won't be able to get him, but you never know. Might as well shoot out an offer. Now in fifth, and the last wide receiver is Jalen Waddle with 79 points. Yes, that's 2 Miami wide receivers in the top 5. Insane start to the year for the Miami wide receivers. Waddle has 398 yards with 3 TDs on 21 receptions, and Waddle is someone I am definitely trying to trade away. I think as we change quarterbacks, it is less likely to have as much rapport with the new quarterback compared to Tua, who he went to college with. And that is 100% why, if you do have him, I would try to trade him away. Obviously only for a good offer, but I think you can get a pretty good offer for Jalen Waddle right now. He's been having some great games. So now let's do Ask Anissa, where I ask my wife Anissa a fantasy football question, and she knows nothing about football. So, Anissa.
Yeah.
Which top 5 player do you think will finish outside the top 10? Jared Goff, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, or Jalen Waddle?
Clyde has a very interesting name. But let's go with Jared Goff.
Jared Goff, all right. Jared Goff is going to have a bad rest of the season, so you should drop him right now. Now let's get back into reviewing where the fantasy football players rank. And first, I'm going to start off with tight ends. And of course, there's no one else but Travis Kelce as the number 1 tight end with 78 points. So far, he has 323 yards with 3 touchdowns and 26 receptions. Great year for him. He could have even had more, similar to Patrick Mahomes, if they weren't just dominating some of these games. And he just kind of, got a rest. He is getting older, so probably just wanted to rest him near the end of the game, especially against Tampa Bay last week, where they got up early and then he kind of didn't do much the rest of the game. Still though, a great year, and for tight ends, it's kind of why you see a lot of these top tight ends just repeat every year that are very consistent. It's very hard to find some of those tight ends that are just good. Second is Mark Andrews with 68 points. He has 263 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 24 receptions. Already 10 points below where Kelce is, and that's just kind of showing how consistent Kelce is. Mark Andrews has had a couple not great games, but he has had those huge game-winning weeks. So again, kind of more hit or miss, but still Mark Andrews, tight end 2, where you drafted him. Very much expected. Now, in the third tight end spot, Kyle Pitts. Got you. No Kyle Pitts on this list because Kyle Pitts stinks. TJ Hawkinson is number 3 with 64 fantasy points, 261 yards with 3 touchdowns and 18 receptions. Very, very similar stat line to Mark Andrews, just those receptions not as high. And that's because he really had that insane week last week. I think it was 40 points in my league, and that's just insane. I mean, pretty unheard of tight ends to get that much. It was more just the Lions not having a ton of receiving options. So personally, I would try to trade him away possibly. That said, I don't even know who you'd get up at tight end that you'd really feel comfortable with. Maybe if you can get like a Pat Freiermuth or something, someone who is pretty solid. You could also try to get Kelsey or Andrews. I think that's a possibility, and yeah, who knows? I still think TJ Hawkinson is solid. I just don't think he's going to be as highly ranked as he is right now by the end of the year. So next is Zach Ertz with 54 fantasy points. A very surprising person as well. He has 181 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 22 receptions. So he's just catching a lot more balls. And overall, pretty solid. I mean, Arizona has been struggling on offense, and Zach Ertz has been the benefactor of that because it's kind of a check down read, and Zach Ertz is just open on a lot of these plays. So pretty solid tight end, spot start, or just solid start if you did punt tight end and not draft one of these top 3 options. You can kind of just start Zach Ertz until he hopefully doesn't get injured, but it has been a very high injury risk in the past. So definitely something to keep in mind that if you do want to trade him, you could try to trade him right now. Next is Tyler Higbee, who has 50 points, 244 yards, on 26 receptions. However, he has 0 touchdowns. Those numbers are crazy. And if he does start getting in the end zone, he could be insane. He could be a top 3 tight end. And I would try to trade for Tyler Higbee. I think he still has a huge upside. I don't think he will get as many catches as he's been getting recently. But overall, I still think he is a very, very solid tight end option. Now let's talk about defenses, something I usually don't talk about, but I want to go over the top defenses because a lot of the times we just kind of forget about defense and we don't even realize who the top defenses are. So I'm going to go over the top 5 defenses. First is Philadelphia at 50 points. They have 63 points allowed, which is pretty high, but they have 10 turnovers and 16 sacks. Those are just massive numbers. Even though they've been giving up a lot of points, they just have these turnovers and sacks, and it just makes up for it. And it's very satisfying as you are playing in fantasy because you don't really have to worry and sweat about them giving up points late in the game because they already have a lot of turnovers and sacks. So definitely someone that I am starting every week right now in fantasy. In second place is San Francisco with 49 points, right next to Philly. They have 38 points allowed, so they've just been performing overall very well as a defense, not giving up a lot of points, and they have 6 turnovers with 15 sacks. This is, again, someone I'm also playing almost every matchup. However, if they are having a really good opponent, I might try to find someone else because if they are playing a very good quarterback who can score against them, they're not as likely to get those turnovers or sacks as someone like Philly. So definitely a little more worried playing those tough matchups. Buffalo is third with 48 fantasy points, and they have allowed 58 points. So they have 9 turnovers and 13 sacks. Again, very similar to Philly. So if you do have Buffalo starting them every week, I think this was kind of expected when you did draft them. You were going to play them every week, so getting what you drafted essentially. Next is Tampa Bay. They have 46 fantasy points. They've allowed 68 points, and they have 9 turnovers and 14 sacks. Again, very satisfying to have those high turnovers and sacks because you don't have to worry about them giving up as many points. And personally, I am playing Tampa Bay every week if you do have them, unless you have one of these other top options. I think Tampa Bay is a solid pick every week. They just have been performing very well on defense. Now, surprisingly, in 5th is Jacksonville, who has probably been the biggest surprise in the NFL world this year. Obviously, they just lost to the Eagles, but they still have 45 points, and that's pretty high numbers considering last week they did give up a lot of points to Philadelphia. They've allowed 67 points, they have 9 turnovers and 9 sacks, And Jacksonville is definitely someone I'm looking to play in good matchups. They really do seem like a solid defense, and honestly, you can probably pick them up and play them most weeks. If they do have a decent 2 solid matchup, definitely playing them. And especially this next week, I'm playing them against Houston. Now let's talk kickers. Again, you don't really consider kickers a lot of the time. You don't pay attention to who is getting a ton of points. You just kind of pick a kicker up that you like on a team or a team that's scoring a lot of points and you just play them. So I'm going to go through the top 5 kickers. I'm going to talk about how many field goals they've made and how many long field goals they made, because a lot of you do have different scoring leagues and you want to draft someone who gets a lot of long field goals, and that's very important. So first, I'm going to talk about Younghoe Koo, who is in first place. He has 48 points. He has made 10 field goals and 3 field goals of 50 plus yards. So overall, great kicker. He's probably one of my favorite kickers in the NFL just because of those onside kicks, the back-to-back onside kicks he did a couple years ago. Just very exciting player to watch. I think overall he's always had a very long kick. He can make a ton of 50-yard field goals. And even though he hasn't made as many 50-yard field goals as some of the other people, he has had a lot of extra points. So that's why he's higher on this list. I don't know if that will continue because Atlanta hasn't looked great, but I do think he will start getting more field goals if they can't convert. So I'm not as worried about that as they get into the tougher matchups. Next is Daniel Carlson on Las Vegas, and he has 46 fantasy points with 12 field goals made, but only 2 of 50 plus. So if you are playing in a league where 50 plus field goals are worth more points, more than 5, if you do have Daniel Carlson, I mean, he's a solid play, but he might not get you that huge upside where some of these other kickers who are kicking a ton of 50 plus yard field goals. So next is Brett Maher on Dallas. He has 45 points with 10 field goals made and 4 of 50 or more yards. And he is a great play if you do have those, again, 50 plus yard bonuses. So someone who in those long kicking leagues, definitely a must start. And next is Graham Gano, who's 43 points, 9 field goals made, but again, 4 of 50 or more yards. And Graham Gano is on the Giants, so he is definitely one of those solid picks. I think the Giants don't have a great offense, so they might struggle in the red zone, and he might kick more field goals. He does have a great leg as well, so yeah, in those 50 or more bonus point leagues, definitely must play him. And fifth and last is Evan McPherson on Cincinnati. He has 42 points, 9 field goals made with 3 of 50 or more yards. And he is just a great pick. I think Cincinnati struggled the first 2 weeks, but moving forward, they should just be a solid offense and someone that I am playing in any format of kicking. So I will stop talking about kickers now because that brings us to the end of the episode. So to end the episode, I'm going to give you the strong opinion of the day, and that is that kickers and defense should not be a part of fantasy football.